how are you? I am so excited to be here because it's an opportunity to talk about one of my passions. And what's really interesting in relation to what I am passionate about is that a lot of the speeches that we've heard today relate to it in that we want to make the world a better place, or that we want to have more equality, or we want to have more peace. What's interesting, though, is that one aspect that we seem to consistently leave out is the aspect of disability and how it might fit in. My passion is promoting the status of women with disabilities through speaking, writing, creative projects, fashion, thus the stripper heels, and educational outreach. And so today what I'm going to do is, obviously I'm going to be using the speaking aspect of it, but I'm also going to do a little bit of educational outreach because I want to share with you some pretty grim statistics, and I'm also going to share with you a little bit of my own story. But then the most important part toward the end is I want to share with you really viable solutions that will start to integrate women with disabilities into our mainstream culture a little bit more. So let's start out with something that we all know, okay? What we all know pretty much right now is that women make up over 50% of our American population. We're all pretty familiar with that. What we're not familiar with is the fact that women with disabilities are 16% of them have a disability. And we don't usually think of it in that way. So if we break that down to a population, out of 144 million women in the United States, 23 million of them are disabled in some way. Now, disability can mean a couple different things. It can be mobility, it can be visual, it can be hearing, or it can be even disabilities that we don't, visually see upon meeting that person. So, being an American female, I might look on paper as though I am a Caucasian female in her early 40s who holds a master's degree. And if feminist thought came into the picture, they would say, oh, well, geez, Bethany, you're already down by one bind. You're already down by one count. And I'm like, well, how am I down by one count? And they'll say, because you're female. So that basically means that our standard of measurements is based on whether or not I am a Caucasian male. And being that I'm not, then we can pretty much go for the fact that, I am apparently down by one bind. But then something interesting happens. I come out on stage and I meet you, and you meet me for the first time. Feminist theory will now say that I'm down by two binds, two counts, a double bind. What is my other bind? The disability. As you notice, I didn't walk on stage, I glided. So I'm down by two, apparently. Now, all of our standards, like I had said earlier, are based on whether or not we're a white heterosexual male. And that gives us a new definition, and that's marginalism. What happens to all of the other people in our society, and that is women, people with disabilities, all other races, and all other orientations, they are labeled as a marginal population. Now that's really important for me to understand, because based on a marginal definitions rather, I have certain choices to make. And those choices are going to really impact almost all of my life outcomes. Now, the first decision that I actually have to make is, do I consider myself a disabled woman, or do I consider myself to be a woman with a disability? That's a very important distinction. So I'm going to use the words of Marilyn Monroe and say, I am very much a woman, and I love it. Okay, and so now that we have that all kind of squared away, let's talk a little bit about the marginalization of women with disabilities. They are currently the largest minority in the world. The largest minority in the world, which is kind of hard to believe because we don't really see each other out and about so much. I'm going to share with you some statistics that pertain specifically to this demographic, and they're going to paint a little bit of a bleak picture, but we're going to come up with some solutions later. All right, when looking at specifically women with disabilities, what we have is that 85% of them will be less likely to become hired than males with disabilities. Now, if you take a step further and you say, okay, say they got the job, they got hired, we're really happy about that, they're going to earn 50% less than a male with a disability of the same disability, actually. And then if you compare them to their able-bodied female peers, they're going to be earning 14% less than them. And so if you look at the disabled female population, you are looking at poverty. And that these are on American standards. This isn't the global standard. And so if a woman with a disability chooses to kind of reach out for independence, have a fulfilling job, have a fulfilling life, she's also facing poverty. Now here are a couple other things that we want to share that kind of, broaden that a little bit. Women with disabilities are 62% more likely to be a victim of domestic and sexual violence compared to able-bodied females. And that's grim. I mean, that does not sound healthy. It doesn't sound supportive. But the outcomes for those women that do become victims gets a little bit worse. One of the issues that we're facing is that if a woman with a disability does become a victim, she has nearly zero access to support and intervention and healthcare services. Can you guys think of any reasons why? Why would she not have support? I mean, these are crimes. We have a system set up. How is it that she would be left out? Anybody? I'm going to pick on the front. Perpetrator could be somebody that provides her support. That is the majority of the cases. But beyond that, you are correct, but beyond that, most women's shelters are not accessible. Yeah. So when you think of, we need to get this woman to a safe place, they're usually not accessible. And so from there, the next problem that we have is that if we get her medical intervention, medical staff and hospitals are still intellectually stumbling when it comes to dealing or handling and treating women with disabilities and viewing them as either abuse victims or, if it's outside of a system of abuse, even as expectant mothers. That's just not gelling in their mind. And so that pulls them back from all of these potential resources. Now let's go back a little bit and talk about the idea that I've made a choice that I'm not a disabled woman, that I'm a woman with a disability. The first thing that I'm going to go and do is analyze the outcomes of my life, my educational track, my occupational endeavors, my health care, and my personal life. Okay, those are all going to be factors that we all want to think about. The issue there is that I actually have the opportunity to think about those choices. And most women with disabilities do not have that option. They don't have the access to the education, and they don't have the access to the healthcare services. And for many, many, many of them, they are not viewed as what we call socially viable. And those sound like really rough, harsh words and terms. Now, what's interesting about all this that I'm sharing with you is that I didn't think I had the right to talk about it. Believe it or not, I did not think that I had the right to talk about it because I had somehow beaten the odds and rolled past the statistics. And so I thought, well, I don't know what these lives are like. I don't know what it's like to not have education. I don't know what it's like to not have options open to me. And so I just kind of took it for granted that I don't qualify. Sorry, I don't qualify. But what's interesting is I know better now. Instead of feeling like I don't qualify to speak on behalf of millions of women with disabilities, not only in the United States, but around the world, I'm obligated. I am called to be a voice for those that cannot speak. Being a voice is very, very important because we're talking about a demographic that is so underserved on the global level. The statistics that I have shared with you, they generally come from university studies, medical reports, and UN global initiatives for women with disabilities. I credit my ability and my privileges and the things that I have going on. I mean, the chance to do fashion and the chance to wear the stripper heels and the, be silly and joke with people and go wherever I want to be and have an attitude, everything. I credit that to my upbringing. I was raised on a dairy farm, as Ross had shared with you. I was Dairy Princess runner-up at one time, serving cheese blocks to people and talking about vitamin D and, all those healthy things. And don't get osteoporosis and that kind of stuff. But I was raised on a dairy farm in a very small town called Russell, Pennsylvania. And I was surrounded by a very loving and supportive family. And I grew up in a small, close-knit community. And I had access to public education, which my parents had fought very, very hard for. And so for me, it was very typical and normal to go to church and youth group and to participate in marching band and concert band and choir and, yes, dairy 4-H and all these different activities. And so I was basically able to be a typical teenager, which was so, to me, absolutely normal. I was not aware that outside of my normal teenage existence that there were thousands and thousands and thousands of women and girls with disabilities that did not have that opportunity. I attended Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, thanks to a federal OVR program. And I entered college as a psychology major, but I kept taking so many communication classes that I sort of switched majors, halfway through, and that actually helped me graduate on time. And then I returned later and earned a master's degree through student loans. Now, since I have graduated, I've been in the collegiate classroom teaching public speaking, so I probably better not mess this up, to tell you the truth. Voice diction, gender communication, and small group communication. And it's been completely enjoyable. I have taught from New York to Texas, and now here in Tennessee for MTSU. And it's been a wild and wonderful ride. We need more women with disabilities in that capacity. They need to have more access to education and health programs. And so even though I've shared with you some statistics that seem really rather harsh, and they seem like this is just really an uphill battle, why don't we take a step back for a moment and think about the 23 million citizens that are all out there wanting to have and pursue the American dream. Something that's often misunderstood, we for some reason, just on site, and I do this too, we look at each other and we think, well, that person doesn't think like I do, or they don't have the same dreams that I do, or I want to go here, I want to go there, and I want to pursue all these different avenues. But what's really an important thing to remember is that the dream and the wish for a fulfilling life and the pursuit of happiness is not limited to the non-disabled. So it doesn't matter what your outer self is, the internal dreams are just as big. They're just contained differently. And so with this information, what do we do with this? I mean, it sounds, like there's a lot of things that are, against us, and then there's these odds that we just can't beat. My belief is that we can turn this underserved demographic around at the grassroots level, starting with the community. The first step that I think is necessary, which I had to come to myself a while ago, a long time ago actually, was that for women with disabilities that have rolled past the statistics, we need to work as mentors to other women with disabilities that are just starting out on their path to independence. The next step comes to your communities, you, the audience, and listeners. What's very important is to identify the women in your community that happen to have a disability, and try to get your community leaders and your educators to rally around them. What we have going on is an issue of access, and it's funny because the access isn't what we think. It's not so much about just ramps and being able to get places. The very first access issue that women with disabilities have to hurdle is their own environment, sometimes their own home. So we're talking about women that do not have a ramp or an access to get out of their own house. And they don't have the resources to get out of their own house. I am very, very grateful for my degree and my full-time work. Because of it, I have been able to get off of disability. And that was one of my life goals, to not be in that system. But for women that can't get off that system, or they're sort of stuck where they are, 93% of them bring in less than $2,000 a month for living expenses. And that includes higher than average medical costs, and if they're lucky, low income to subsidized housing, and then food or food subsidies. And so what it kind of translates to is that women with disabilities that do want to reach out for some independence and a fulfilling life are going to have to make that choice facing poverty. And so if you know, as I was saying earlier, of somebody in your community that they don't have a ramp to get out of their home, it is our responsibility to go as a community on a local level, to go to our business leaders and our community leaders and get a ramp put in somehow. Work with different construction companies, find a way to do that so that she can get out of her home. Now, after she gets out of her home, the next step that we have to do, and this is very ironic, is all of the social services that are in place that uplift communities. You need to go make sure that they're actually accessible to all, especially the ones in the most dire need of them. Because generally what happens is we've got some things in place, but the access, the physical access to them, is one of the larger blockades. So if we've talked at a community level, if we can act locally, encourage people locally, get ramps put in, make sure that our social services are available, let's talk about the education aspect, because education to me is the only thing that got me to where I am today. I did share with you earlier that I had grown up on a dairy farm. While I enjoyed all those privileges that I had mentioned, one thing that was in the back of my head was, as I grow up, I'm not going to physically qualify for jobs in my rural area. I mean, I had the willingness. If I had to throw Dad's dog food bags on a truck, I would. I had no problem with that. But that was not going to be a physical thing that I could do. And so I knew that the only way for me to get work and independence was to be able to go to school. And that education and that empowerment got me everything that followed from there. And so as educators, find the students with disabilities, even at the elementary and high school level, talk with them and find out what their strengths and their interests are, and start to match those up with opportunities that they can join in on, whether it's a local organization, a youth group, events, and activities. Now, at the high school level, start talking with them about what their strengths and interests are, and match them up with universities or training programs that have an office for students with disabilities. Now, just because I teach at a four-year university, that doesn't mean that I push onto women with disabilities that everybody needs to get a four-year degree, everybody has to get an advanced degree. That's not going to be the case for everybody, and it may not even be the interest for people. I think that the most important thing is any training whatsoever, whether that is on the job, community college, trade school, could be a four-year degree, could be an advanced degree. Any level of education is of tremendous benefit for women with disabilities, because it will be the one thing that empowers them enough to get them into safer living environments. Because if they don't leave that in that type of environment or that sort of assistance, what's going to happen when they reach for that independence is that they will be living in a low-income home in some of our most unsafe neighborhoods. If that woman has a mobility issue, she's going to be on the ground floor. Do you see how that circles back around to some of the safety issues, the domestic violence, and then the lack of services and the help and the intervention? So education for me just empowered everything in my life to make everything that I have today absolutely possible. And I believe that it's the same way for anybody else. I think that if we look at education and all of the demographics, not just women with disabilities, we can see where getting training and getting understanding and getting education makes everybody improve. We can look at statistics through like microloans for developing countries, that when they educate one woman, the whole community goes up. It works the same way in here in the United States. When an entire community is well educated, that state goes up. The community has more cultural diversity. The bar for equal rights begins to get raised. Technology comes in. More recreational activities come in. And it bumps up every level that you go. So if you have a well-educated state, then your nation stands to rise. And when your nation stands to rise because everybody is so well-educated and aware of one another, crime declines. And when diversity is a natural part of a culture, acceptance and progress and society actually begins to function as it's meant to. And one of those ingredients does include women with disabilities. There's 23 million of them. Can you see the commerce there? Can you see the billions of dollars being lost by not counting in that kind of an underserved demographic? You're talking about 23 million consumers, workers, and citizens who are interested in the American dream. Because of education, I'm able to be a part of the community and the ebb and flow and the things that are going on, the pop culture. I absolutely enjoy and I love my life. I am married. We are approaching our 16th wedding anniversary already, believe it or not. He's amazing. He's here somewhere today. We are the parents to a 17-year-old teenager, the daughter. So you know how rough I have it. That's harder than disability, I'll tell you what. I'm like, you said what? You know. But we're parents thanks to adoption. And we are just a fabulous little family unit that enjoys ourselves very much. Education just empowered me through everything. And it is our responsibility to help others roll past those statistics and to get education to the women with disabilities and help them raise the bar on their standard of living. Your city, your state, your nation stands only to benefit for it. Thank you so much.